Next, on Current News, Religious Freedom Week puts its focus on the Equality Act.
I think they don't realize the implications of a bill like this on religious organizations.
The measure meant to fight discrimination could itself discriminate against the church. Plus, an intense rescue effort after a building collapse in Miami. The Archdiocese is praying for the victims and first responders. Republicans on Capitol Hill pushing to make the Hyde Amendment permanent.
Taxpayers should not, I say again, should not be compelled against their conscience to fund abortion.
And President Biden and lawmakers come to an agreement on infrastructure, but their work is far from over. The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Christine Persichetti. United States bishops are on a mission to stop a bill that could be taken up in the Senate any day now. The bill, called the Equality Act, would enshrine legal protections for LGBTQ Americans, a worthy cause. But instead of respecting differences in beliefs about marriage and sexuality, the bishops believe it would discriminate against people of faith precisely because of those beliefs. This Religious Freedom Week, Current News' Emily Druby is looking at some of the possible consequences of the act.
We're mainly concerned about religious freedom.
The ability to live out one's faith, that's what Ed MECHMANN says, is at risk if the Equality Act passes. He's the director of Safe Environment at the Archdiocese of New York. The act is supposed to stop discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity, but critics, including U.S. bishops, argue it actually discriminates against Catholics.
They have good motives. They want to ban discrimination. That's all fine. But I think they don't realize the implications of a bill like this on religious organizations and religious people.
Ed says the impact would be great, especially since it eliminates the Religious Freedom Restoration Act as a potential defense. For example, if a Catholic hospital didn't want to do a gender reassignment surgery, faith wouldn't be an excuse to say no.
We would be forced to say things and do things that our faith really forbids us from doing. It's unprecedented in American history.
The implications of this broad act could be far-reaching. It would likely force hospitals to perform abortions and for employees to cover them. It could force women to share spaces like dorms or locker rooms with men. It could force schools to become co-ed and even allow men into women's prisons. A potential safety issue, explains Mary Hassan.
Tips the scales and says it's sort of winner take all, that these sexual orientation and gender identity categories are always going to trump anyone's religious belief.
As a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, she's an expert on issues affecting faith and women. She's very concerned about this act. The Equality Act has already passed in the House.
It is just a hugely important bill to defeat.
Critics and the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops trying to do just that, reaching out to lawmakers, educating them on the negative effects it could have on the faithful. While there has been some talk of the Senate getting to this legislation during Pride Month, it has recently stalled. Catholics also gearing up for legal battles in case this act is passed. In Brooklyn, Emily Druby, Currents News.
If you would like to voice your opposition to the Equality Act, just go to votervoice.net/USCCB/home. Our Religious Freedom Week coverage continues later in this newscast. The USCCB's Director of Religious Liberty with more on the Equality Act and how it could affect your daily life. That's still ahead in this newscast. Several House lawmakers are joining in on the pro-life fight, calling on Congress to make the Hyde Amendment permanent. The measure prohibits your taxpayer dollars from going towards abortions and is renewed every year as part of spending measures. But after President Biden excluded the amendment from his proposed federal budget, New Jersey Representative Chris Smith introduced a bill to make the measure permanent.
Unborn children have been denied justice and the most fundamental of all human rights, the right to life. The right to life, Madam Speaker, is for everyone, not just the planned, the privileged, and the perfect.
Sharing those sentiments, the Bishop of Brooklyn, Nicholas DiMarzio, is urging Catholics in his diocese to reach out to their lawmakers and demand the amendment be preserved.
Senator Hyde had this put in, and it's withstood the ravages of time and different administrations, that no taxpayer money would go to fund abortions. We can't stop abortions completely, but it's unfair to say that we're going to take taxpayer money where people don't agree with it to use it to destroy life.
You can also help protect the Hyde Amendment and save innocent lives. Just head on over to notaxpayerabortion.com and sign the petition. A big day in D.C. for President Joe Biden's agenda, the president and bipartisan senators reaching a deal on infrastructure. But now the measure must pass Congress ahead of their 4th of July break. All this as the commander-in-chief and lawmakers also work out a plan for policing reform. And as the deadline gets closer, the next 24 hours could be crucial. Deal making in D.C. with infrastructure and policing front and center.
The divisions of the moment shouldn't stop us from doing the right thing for the future.
But the division remains and the countdown is on. The Senate is getting ready to start a 2-week recess. With infrastructure, we're talking improvements to roads, bridges, water systems, technology, climate-related measures, manufacturing, research and development, and the caregiving economy. And how to pay for it all. But senators on both sides of the aisle say there's an agreement on a bipartisan deal. They're talking about it with the president at the White House. But will it be enough? Depends on who you ask.
My sense is that that deal right now has 20 votes, not 60 votes. We're going to have to take a deep dive into the agreement.
Last week, I heard from a lot of my colleagues saying, I just need to look at one other issue. You know, can you do this? Can you do that? But there's a lot of interest in having a bipartisan proposal.
Same goes for police reform, but that hasn't been easy either, with debate over the standard for charging police officers with crimes and qualified immunity so police officers can be sued in civil court. A lead senator on the negotiation says it may be a make or break day. The July 4th recess begins at the end of the week. Biden's big day in D.C. comes ahead of Vice President Kamala Harris's big day at the border. White House officials say the Journey Friday is part of her efforts to address the root causes of migration. The announcement follows weeks of criticism by Republican colleagues for not visiting the area. She'll be at the border days before former President Donald Trump will be. He plans to meet with Texas Governor Greg Abbott and a group of House Republicans there. Earlier this month, an immigration summit was held just outside of Chicago, where bishops from the U.S., Central America, and Mexico met to discuss a plan of action to tackle the situation at the border. John Lavenberg, national correspondent for the Tablet and Crux, joins us now to tell us what they talked about. And John, as we just mentioned, the vice president is planning to visit the border for the first time on Friday to look into the root causes of migration. Did the bishops talk about root causes?
They did, Christine, and root causes is really at the top of their priorities when it comes to addressing the immigration situation. Some of the things that they suggested include bishops from the U.S., Central America, and Mexico going and having a high-level meeting with the administration to discuss these things, as well as those individuals taking a trip to Central America to get a firsthand look at it themselves. And at the same time, another thing they want to do is take the USCCB's committee on justice, peace, and human development and turn that into kind of a think tank to evaluate the Biden administration's policies and how they plan to address root causes.
All right, and what are some of the other key points that they addressed?
So in addition to root causes, the two big things that they focused on at this meeting were advocacy, how they're going to approach the administration with different things, and then welcoming, how they, as the Catholic Church, can welcome migrants into the country.
So what is their plan for welcome and advocacy?
So welcome, the big thing that they want to do, and this is a long-term goal, what they want to do is create a national framework for how the Catholic Church can welcome migrants into the country, and encompassed in that is how different dioceses can tailor that to their own response. Obviously, because every diocese, the situation is different, so they want to tailor to each diocese to make that unique welcome. And then on the other end of it, it's also right in line with root causes as far as engaging the administration on different things. The number one priority they outlined is ending Title 42, which is a Trump-era policy from the start of the pandemic that limits the right to asylum for migrants.
All right, we'll watch and see how successful they are. John Lavenberg, national correspondent of the Tablet and Crux, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
If you're struggling to pay your rent, listen up. The Biden administration is extending a federal pause on evictions through the end of July. The White House wants to buy more time to get federal rent relief money to the tenants who need it. The issue has become a signature priority for Catholic Charities USA, which aims to address homelessness through federal policy and on a community level.
As of now, we have 163 grants out to the charities agencies totaling worth about $1.6 million. So between direct advocacy for federal response and the work we're doing with religious sisters, we're trying to raise the issue of homelessness and affordable housing in this country.
According to the Census Bureau, 1 in 5 renters are behind on their rent, which means 30 to 40 million people are at risk of losing their homes when the eviction moratorium is lifted. Search and rescue operations are underway after a massive 12-story condo partially collapsed in Surfside, Florida. At least one person is dead. Dozens have been rescued, but there are still 99 people unaccounted for. Rescue crews continue to dig through the rubble and debris of the collapsed building. The town's mayor says saving people is their top priority.
And we rang the alarm bell, and Mayor Cava sent the cavalry, as did the governor. And that has made all the difference in the world. They've got resources like you can't believe here. We've got the dogs, we've got the equipment, and we're going to do our very best to save as many people in that pile of rubble as we possibly can.
The Archbishop of Miami, Thomas Wensky, is praying for the victims, saying Catholic charities and local clergy have joined other voluntary agencies and faith leaders to help out. The NYPD's Hate Crimes Task Force is investigating vandalism on a statue of George Floyd in Brooklyn. Art producers say they will immediately begin to clean up the statue that was unveiled over the weekend as part of the city's Juneteenth celebration. The 6-foot statue was scheduled to stay at the Brooklyn Plaza for 2 weeks before moving to Union Square. So far, no arrests have been made. More remains of Indigenous people have been found in Canada. The remains of 761 people discovered at the site of a residential school once run by the Catholic Church in the province of Saskatchewan. The remains, mainly children, were found in unmarked graves. The discovery comes just weeks after more than 200 children's remains were found at another former school in British Columbia. Both schools were part of a government system that took Indigenous children in the country from their families and put them in these boarding schools. There's a lot more news headed your way as bishops pray against the Equality Act. A recent Supreme Court case could mean trouble for it.
The Equality Act cannot overturn Fulton. If anything, Fulton spells trouble for the Equality Act.
Coming up, we speak with the Director of Religious Freedom for the USCCB about how the Equality Act could mean discrimination against Catholics. Plus, while Chinese Catholics are happy about a change in policy by the nation's government, they say it doesn't go far enough. And the streets of Williamsburg will once again see the Giglio, how they're preparing for a beloved feast.
There are now some big changes to the tablet website. You can get personalized access to the Catholic news you value. Sign up for free at thetablet.org.
Now back to our top story, marking Religious Freedom Week with a closer look at the Equality Act. U.S. bishops fear if it's passed, it would discriminate against people of faith. We're joined now by Dan BALSERAK, Director of Religious Liberty and Assistant General Counsel of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And Dan, as Emily Drewby reported earlier, the Equality Act would prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. But U.S. bishops say it would discriminate against Catholics. How so?
Well, there are a number of ways that the bill specifically would impact ministries of faith. Perhaps the most pernicious and the most pronounced way the bill would do that is that it specifically seeks to carve out the application of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. RFRA is the sort of common moniker for it. RFRA is quasi-constitutional. It applies to all federal law unless a bill specifically says RFRA does not apply to this law. No bill has ever done that. No bill that Congress has passed has ever specifically sought to prevent the assertion of religious liberty claims that are protected by RFRA.
So from a legal standpoint, if the bill is passed, what does it mean for religious institutions or businesses? What could happen?
The impacts are myriad. It is a sprawling bill that applies to, it amends various sections of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, as well as other federal non-discrimination statutes. In terms of its application to religious organizations, one, for example, when the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, it was intended to address race discrimination. Mm-hmm. In particular, the difficulties that people of color had with interstate travel, getting served at lunch counters, things like that. The Equality Act drastically expands what counts as a public accommodation so that it captures any establishment that provides a good or service to the public. Now, of course, as people of faith, when we engage in charitable ministry, we don't ask someone in need, are you Catholic? Mm-hmm. We need to know if you're Catholic before we give you a hot meal. That's not what we do. We serve everyone.
Right, and speaking of that, just last week, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Catholic Church in the Catholic Foster Care Agency case in Philadelphia. Let's listen to what Philadelphia's Archbishop Nelson Perez had to say about the ruling.
It is my personal hope that today's decision makes it abundantly clear that religious ministries cannot be forced to abandon their beliefs as the price for ministering to those in need.
Obviously, the Archbishop was pleased with the outcome, but what could that ruling be overturned if the Equality Act becomes law?
The Equality Act cannot overturn Fulton. If anything, Fulton spells trouble for the Equality Act.
Okay. All right, Dan BALSERAK, Director of Religious Liberty and Assistant General Counsel to the USCCB. Thanks for keeping us informed.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
New York's Cardinal Timothy Dolan is promoting Religious Freedom Week, highlighting both its importance and critical timing.
Religious freedom, right, is a core value of the founding of our beloved country. And it's not a coincidence that we observe this celebration as we approach Independence Day, the 4th of July. See, we Catholics want to work to protect our charitable institutions, our schools, hospitals, foster care services, so that we can continue to serve this great country we cherish as our earthly home.
Cardinal Dolan also called on Catholics to pick one topic to pray for every day of this Religious Freedom Week. Friday on Currents News, our Religious Freedom Week coverage continues. Jessica Easthope will explore a growing problem here in the Diocese of Brooklyn and around the country, church vandalism. That's tomorrow on Currents News. Now to another story of freedom. In a major policy shift, China is now allowing families to have up to 3 children, a far cry from its one-child mandate that went into effect decades ago, and a response to China's slowing population growth and aging citizens. But to Catholics, any limit on life is still against God's will. Jessica Easthope spoke to one woman who was forced to leave the country because of government control over pregnancies.
Kathleen can't tell you her last name, but she wants you to know her story.
I was pregnant at that time. If I give birth in China, I would get a lot of trouble.
It's the story of so many Chinese families torn between a government policy and faith. After having her first daughter, Kathleen dodged the government-mandated birth control. And in 1998, when she became pregnant with her second daughter, she knew she would be forced to go against God's will.
So when I pregnant, I must do abortion, no choice.
Years later, China is undergoing a major policy shift, one the government hopes will help grow its now declining population. For the first time in decades, married couples are allowed to have 3 children. In 1980, China's one-child policy went into effect, shortly before the country became home to more than 1 billion people.
Of course, it is a major switch, but in reality, I think it does not make big change.
Sister Monica Gann, the pastoral associate at St. John Vianney Church in Flushing, says while much of the world views the third child policy as progress, Chinese people, especially Chinese Catholics, do not.
one-child policy and a three-child policy, even a 10-child policy, is the same thing. The government makes decision for you, and we know that the right of reproduction comes from God.
Though the third-child policy is still impossible to live under for many Chinese Catholics, if it had been in place in 1998, Kathleen would be raising her family in China today.
My family there, my parents there. Of course, we want to stay together. No choice.
They believe it's another form of religious persecution rampant in the country.
The limited family and the Christian persecution expose the same problem: no human rights.
In Flushing, Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
Experts at the Center for China and Globalization say the country could abolish family planning policies altogether within the next few years. Still to come on Currents News, an annual tradition back in Brooklyn, where and when you could see the Giglio dance. And a surprise fit for a pope. We'll tell you what's in the works for Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI's ordination anniversary. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. Preparations are underway for the Giglio's return to the streets of Brooklyn. The 72-foot-tall 4-ton tower is still under construction, but will soon parade through Williamsburg, celebrating the feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel and San Paulino de Nola. The century-old tradition was canceled last year because of the pandemic, only the second time that's happened since 1903. Wow. The celebration starts Wednesday, July 7th and ends on Sunday, July 18th. For a full schedule, visit olmcfeast.com. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI is celebrating the 70th anniversary of his ordination on the 29th. He became a priest in 1951 before rising to lead the Catholic Church in 2005. In honor of his 7 decades of service, those who live in the monastery at the Vatican with him have put together something very special for him.
Benedict XVI still doesn't know, but we've prepared a surprise for him. For him, surprises are always related to the liturgy. We've invited a group of former members of the choir from Regensburg who learned to sing alongside his brother. Now they are between 40 and 60 years old. Some of them will sing in the chapel during Mass.
A special touch for the 94-year-old retired pope, since it's been 1 year since his brother, who directed that choir, passed away. Wow. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us, because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.